It is my pleasure to welcome a returning guest back to the show, and that is none other than my friend Russell Gray. He is partners with me in the collective Inner Circle, and you've heard about that over the years. It's great to have him on. We're going to talk a little bit about monetary and fiscal policy as they relate to precious metals and real estate and all that kind of good stuff. But Russell, it's good to have you. I just saw you at the Limitless conference, and we hung out with RFK there. That was fun.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun and very insightful. And just a few days before he made that appearance, he had made the decision to drop out of the race or suspend his campaign
Yeah.
and then come out with his endorsement of Donald Trump, which was kind of a, I don't know, earthquake in the
Yeah.
political realm. And it's really interesting to watch the way the conventional dividing lines between the parties have shifted. And one of the things that RFK talked about was how in his view, the Republican Party has become really the party of Main Street, which
Yeah.
it used to be the other way around. And so it's really fun to be alive right now. I'm old enough to have been through quite a few election cycles. I've seen a lot of things happen politically. And I don't really tend to be political because I think discussions of politics or debates about how you or I think things should be and the way we think the world ought to be. Last time I looked, nobody in power is calling me and asking me my opinion. I get to cast my vote, and that's about it.
Yeah.
So I think the bigger picture is really to understand how the people who do have their hands on the levers of power think, and not talk about the politics, but the policies and how those policies trickle down to Main Street, and then just read and react. It doesn't really matter how you feel about it. It is
Yeah.
what it is. And I think there was a lot of that going on at Limitless, which I found very helpful.
It really does seem like, and I guess it's probably felt like this throughout history at certain times, but it really does seem like we are on the verge of just a nation where the middle class is being just completely hollowed out and eviscerated. Homelessness is skyrocketing. Crime is skyrocketing. At the time of this recording, 20,000 Haitian immigrants were dumped on a little Ohio town, and these people are scared to death, as they should be. I mean, Venezuelan gangs are taking over apartment complexes in Colorado and Chicago and other areas, now North Dallas as well. It's getting pretty scary. And I think for the first time in my lifetime, Russell, there's real political risk, whereas that was always something reserved for other countries in Central and South America and Eastern Europe and certain Asian countries. They had political risk, but in the US you could always count on rule of law and a good infrastructure that would take care of you. But it seems like that's very intentionally being uprooted right now.
Well, I think you get in trouble when you try and assign motives. I'm not saying I disagree with you. I probably would be inclined to agree with you, but as I said, it really doesn't matter, right? If you're locked in a room with a big elephant, whether the elephant likes you, hates you, or doesn't even know you exist, if it steps on you, you're equally dead. So what
Mhm.
matters is your ability to watch that elephant and understand what it's thinking and what it's feeling. And maybe its motives matter a little bit. But to me, I think, and we talked about this. I sat on the State of the Union panel with Chris Martenson and Kiyosaki and Kenny, and was George on that? I don't remember. But it was a pretty cool panel. And yeah, George was on there because he talked about economic cycles. And I've lived long enough, and I'm a little bit older than George, that I've realized that economic cycles really are derived from policy. And policy is derived from power. And what we're really at is the end of a power cycle. And in my view, it kind of started with the Civil War, but it really took hold when the shift of power, the great reset of its day, in 1913 with the formation of the Federal Reserve, the passing of the 16th Amendment, the creation of the income tax, which didn't exist up to that point, the creation of the IRS, which has tremendous police power for an organization ostensibly just designed to collect revenue.
Yeah.
And so it started out as being something only to go after the rich, which is how these often start. And then it worked its way onto Main Street. But if you really go back in the fullness of time and look at the consequences from 1913, when the money system changed and was taken away from the government and given to a cartel of private bankers, which a lot of people don't know that's what happened, but that's what happened. And then from that point forward, within just 5 years, we found ourselves, or 4 years, we found ourselves in World War I. And that a lot of people would make the argument that there's some motivation for the people who finance these wars and profit from them
Oh,
to play a hand in encouraging them. And so a lot of money got printed, and we had the roaring 20s, which is what happens when you print a lot of money. And we had a big stock market bubble, and we all know how that ended with the Great Depression. But the next big shift happened in 33 with the Executive Order 6102 and the confiscation of money, which was at that time gold. And Americans were no longer allowed to own money. They had to own claims on money, which were gold certificates,
I
or
like how
not
you
even
make
gold
that
certificates.
distinction.
Yeah,
Yes.
they were given Federal Reserve notes, which are IOUs. Now, they were redeemable at that time for silver, but later on that came to an end. Another part of this great reset that happened on this dollar-based financial system happened in 1945 with Bretton Woods. And I know you know it well. That's when the dollar, backed by gold, became the world's reserve currency. Well, by the 60s, we had printed so much money, we were basically in danger of not being able to honor our commitments. And they passed a Coinage Act in 1965 and took the silver away from the people. And now we have zinc-plated copper coins that aren't worth anywhere near their metal value, or their face value is not worth anywhere near their metal value. They took the silver out. And
Right.
so I take it for granted because I grew up when that happened, that everybody remembers what real money was like. But, I've gotten to be older and people don't. And then right after that, the ultimate end of that era was 1971, August 15th, 1971. And
The
so,
day that will live in infamy. That's the real
yeah,
day.
that was when Nixon defaulted. And so that triggered this inflation, which has really been part of our everyday life. If you go to the St. Louis Fed and you've seen these charts, you can see how the debt, the deficits, the inflation, everything really started to unravel. And the reason I'm telling the story is because control of the money is power. And when people control the money, they control everything. And so keeping a grip on that money system, but this money system is flawed, and
Mhm.
eventually it breaks. And I think that fast forward after the reset with Volcker of the interest rates, which kicked off a 40-year bond bubble, which many people that are old enough, our age, rode as equity created by debt. Now, your debt-induced inflation.
Inflation-induced debt destruction. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, all of that is rooted in this monetary
Yeah.
policy. And I think when you don't understand far enough up the food chain, when you read and react, you don't see things coming fast. And the reason I become obsessed with this is it's pretty common knowledge for anybody that's been out there following this. I lost everything in 2008. And it was because I didn't understand any of this. And so
Mhm.
it became like this obsession to me to understand, how did I not see this coming? How do people not know? How did only a handful of people know? And why didn't anybody listen to them?
Mhm.
And so now I have I think, a better handle. That's why I go to things like Limitless. And so my obsession is Main Street. I care a lot about Main Street. I live on Main Street. I call myself a Main Street capitalist. I've been, kind of an entrepreneur and an independent guy since I got out of high school. And to your earlier point, you've got this big divide now because this financial system and the attempts to keep the power have rotted out the middle class. And
Mhm.
why do I say that? Because all the manufacturing jobs had to be exported, which was a way for us to reduce our labor costs, and we replaced it with credit. Now we are literally importing cheap labor. And the last jobs report, I'm sure you saw it, showed 1.2 million Native American jobs were lost and 685,000 immigrant jobs were gained. And so that's where policy meets Main Street. And I want to appreciate the opportunity to have the conversation because a lot of people don't want to talk about it because it sounds political. I'm just saying, if you understand the history and you understand the mechanics of what's happening, then you can understand why it's happening and then hopefully see where there is going to be opportunity or a risk that you may want to take advantage of or avoid.
Yeah, absolutely. So everybody loves to think about and, really have some idea as to what's coming next. So if you can speak to any of that, your thoughts about future inflation or deflation, if you, I doubt you think that's in the cards, but if you do, and real estate prices, rent prices, whatever.
So I think that it all really hinges on the dollar. And I think what we're seeing is the dollar system near the end of its shelf life. If you go back and look historically, in 2002, right around the turn of the century, silver or gold was about $250 an ounce. Today it's $2,500 an ounce, which means the dollar lost 90% of its value based on real money, gold. But if you go back at $250 an ounce from 1913, when it was $20 an ounce, it had lost over 90% of its value. So 90% and then another 90%. And so at some point, there's not much value left. And when that begins to happen, you're going to change something. In history, when the people in power debase the currency to a point, the theft becomes obvious to the people on Main Street, they usually change out the government. I think the people who are in charge today know that that's what they do. And I think some of what we're seeing politically all around the world is a result of this power system coming to an end and the fraud of inflation and printed currency becoming obvious to the common man. And we live in the age of the internet where guys like you and I can have these conversations still relatively unfettered. Although I've gotten some denial of service attacks, if I say things that are a little bit too out there. But I think that
I just can't believe what a big part the media and the big tech companies are playing in this stuff. I mean, it is the amount of control and censorship is unbelievable. It's so scary. But again, to your point, I mean, there's so many little small players, so many little influencers and mini celebrities that it's really hard to, for them, it's like a game of whack-a-mole. They'd love to shut us all down, but they just can't. I mean,
well, and there's a principle there, Jason, that's super, super important because there are people who think that if we can just consolidate power into the hands of a person who upholds our standards, then that person will come in and make everything right. And there are people who think that that's Kamala Harris. And there are people who think that's Donald Trump. But at the end of the day, that isn't the answer. Our founders really understood. And the point you just made is exactly the point. Power needs to be decentralized. It's the power of Bitcoin and blockchain, decentralized. It's the power of the internet, decentralized. It's the power of free new media, decentralized. It is whack-a-mole. For people who are trying to contain power in a decentralized system, they can't do it. So all of their policies are designed to herd
believe me, they
people.
are trying.
They try to herd you into their power structures. And so if you recognize the basic principle that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely, then I think any free thinking person, regardless of the way you think the world should work, I think we all want to be more free. I think we all want to have more control over our decisions and our wealth, whether it's health or how we spend our money or where we work or what prices we set or what wages we pay. When somebody comes in and starts trying to micromanage your life from the top down, history says it doesn't end well. And part of that is because human beings, I think, inherently don't want to be ruled in that way, even though they want to give people power to rule others that way, thinking it will make them freer. But that, I believe, is a false promise. So to me, anything that decentralized, I'm not a fan of Wall Street. I would rather see people invest on Main Street. I'd rather see people who earn money on Main Street reinvest that money in Main Street, whether it's housing, syndications, apartment buildings, development projects, farms, little factories, mom and pop shops, small businesses. I think the more Main Street entrepreneurism or Main Street capitalism that we have, the healthier, more decentralized our society will be, and the more free people will be. So I'm that, where I'm at, and the reason I left the real estate guys, not that I have any problem with Robert or the real estate guys. I enjoyed it. It was a great run, and we're still partners, as you mentioned, with George and Kenny in Collective Inner Circle, and it's fantastic. But I wanted to get out and have a platform where I could kind of talk a little bit more freely about things that I feel very, very concerned about. I've got 6 kids and 15 grandchildren. I'm beginning to think like a founding father. I wonder what the world is going to be like 100 years from now, when my kids are, and my grandkids are, in their senior years and trying to worry about their kids. I feel like at some point a generation has to stand up and go, hey, you know what? This has to stop. I wish that the generation that allowed the gold to be confiscated would have said no, and the list goes on and on.
Let's talk about that because you just made a really good point. Give us some action steps that people can take to combat this historic power grab that we are going through right now. And it's kind of amazing to me that this is happening in the age of such seeming awareness and technology, and after a run where people have had it so good for so long. I mean, maybe half the population of the United States wants to go backwards. That's shocking to me. But share some action steps, action ideas.
Well, I mean, to me, I think if you understand the idea that the ultimate minority is the individual,
Yep. Ayn
that,
Rand. Yeah.
yeah, then I think that you want to express your individuality as much as you can. And I think if you're inclined to pick up a microphone and host a podcast, I would do that. If you're not,
So
write,
it
blog.
doesn't mean putting in three nose rings and dyeing your hair pink. Okay.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I don't have a problem if people want to do that. Sometimes, the stereotype of people who do that have a certain policy favor, which is empowering people to control other people's lives. But I think if you just work on being independent, I like to start with money because I think it's the common denominator. So try to invest on your own, buy rental houses, work with Jason and his team and figure out how to do that. When you move up to apartment buildings, do that. Invest in things that are real, tangible, that you understand, in markets that you understand. Then I think, yeah, I'm a big fan of gold as an alternative to the dollar and the banking system. I think having some is a good idea. It helps you be more independent. I think having some cash outside the banking system, just in case the banking system decides to limit how much access you can have. There are places around the world. I know you just traveled, and George was talking about that at Limitless, where people can't get money out, $40 a day. You might have a lot of money in the bank, but if you can't get it, what good is it? But I think the other thing too is, and one of my current passions is next generation. We're very concerned. A lot of people are very concerned about this next election, but I'm very concerned about this next generation. Ronald Reagan said, freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on for them to do the same. And so whether you have kids or not, I think the thing to think about, and Jason, I don't believe you have any children, but 30 years from now, those 10-year-olds are going to be in the seats of power, deciding
Yeah.
what your life is like in your old age. And
And in
so
some ways, that's pretty scary.
it's very
when you look
scary.
at
It's
when you
very
look at the
scary,
population of young
especially
people
as we're
nowadays.
finding out what's been going on in these controlled environments. And so I
Yeah.
think take back the education of your children. We homeschooled back in the 80s and 90s before it was a thing. I'm not saying that
Wow.
you need to or should, but I can tell you I don't regret it at all. And I think my kids are very happy. In fact, I've got two of my kids with children that are homeschooling their children, and they feel great about it. They're entrepreneurs, they're independent thinkers, but be very involved in what's going on in your children's lives and teach them the principles of contributing. The problem with our school systems today and our society in general is it trains people to believe that everything they need should just magically appear because they don't actually get to be a part of productive society until they're in their mid
Right.
20s. They're basically locked out between child labor laws and minimum wage laws, and then putting them in college education where they're so busy in college that they really, for the first 4 or 5 years of their voting life, they've never actually lived in the real world. I did a show with a young lady who was kind of in that school. She'd gone to a college prep high school and got into college, got a degree in political science, had a student loan, even though her parents paid tens of thousands of dollars. She still graduated with $88,000 in debt. She moved to Washington, D.C. to get inside the Beltway and go into the State Department because she wanted to make the world better. And she couldn't get a job. So she got a job in retail and didn't make any money because of chargebacks. And so she ended up starting her own business, and she made, I think, $50,000 her first 6 months.
Hmm.
And what she realized by becoming a Main Street capitalist was that the policies that she believed in and supported and the things that she thought were good for America were actually made her life miserable. And she did a
Hmm.
180. And it wasn't a political decision, it was a pragmatic decision. And I think we're seeing that right now. I think people on Main Street have realized that they've been sold out by certain policies and politicians, and the dividing lines aren't what they've always been. So you ask for actionable items. To me, break free from as many systems of control as you can. Use your freedoms. They're like muscles. If you don't use them, you lose them. And invest in things you own and control. Take more responsibility and invest in the next generation, knowing that that is a great investment because they will be making the decisions that will affect your life. If a 10-year-old today is taught that taking 25% of unrealized capital gains levels the playing field and makes their life better, and they don't understand because they never had any capital gains, they don't understand what that really means in the real world, then they'll grow up and vote for it. And that could be the reality that those of us who, have a different feeling are going to have to deal with. And so invest in young people. And that's a big this raising capitalist project that I'm doing. That's really my focus right now.
Yeah, good stuff. Any thoughts you want to leave us with just to wrap it up? And please give out your website, tell people where they can find you.
Yeah, I think you just study, read the news, and don't read it as truth. Read it as a question, and then ask yourself if it makes sense. And you can learn a lot, ask a lot of questions, listen to smart people, and continue to dig in and strive to understand. Take personal responsibility, as I mentioned, and really promote freedom and decentralization. As far as me, I'm in the process of getting all my new brands and shows set up. So the best way to track me is just send an email to follow at Russell Gray. Russell Gray, Gray.com, russellgray.com. And I will be happy to let you know when I pop up and I start having things to say that you can listen to.
Sounds good. Russell Gray, thanks again for joining us.
Thanks, Jason.